presentation, and then if I do it right, you will have questions, because anytime you learn something, you're always going to ask more, right? That's the job of teaching well. So David or Mel, was there anything else you guys wanted to say before I get rolling?
No,
Yeah,
Mel, take it away.
welcome everybody, and I hope you get to have a lovely evening for the next hour or so. Gordon, it's all yours.
All right, I am ready. Okay, so hi folks, my name is Gordon Walker. I run the Fascinated by Fungi account here on social media. It's on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, Twitter, every possible imaginable form of social media I can think of, which gets kind of overwhelming sometimes, but I'm doing my best to hopefully just entertain and educate you guys. So what you have in front of you here is a logo that I had commissioned by Chris Oxley, who's a student artist down in Texas. And I'd seen him do some really cool faces. These are sort of Arcambolo type faces, and he'd done them with whales. And I really liked his style, and I reached out and said, hey, would you be willing to do one with mushrooms? And he's like, well, sure, but I don't really know anything about mushrooms. And I said, cool, I have a great idea. So I had done a sketch where I had very poorly rendered my own face in mushrooms. And it sort of had the idea of having an amanita and the mycena and the chicken of the woods, all the things that are there. And I'd sort of labeled them, but he took a look and he was like, well, I want to use like a real face for reference. Can you send me a photo? So I sent him this sort of 3/4 view of my face holding my taki. And that's what this is. But I still love it because it has so many of the mushrooms that I absolutely love and was excited about. Sort of there's a reishi collar, there's even a little bit of slime mold. And of course, I snuck a slug in there. So anyway, I hope you guys like that. I think it's a good embodiment of how sort of fascinated and obsessed I am with fungi. So let me get rolling. Like I said, Fascinated by Fungi is my social media platform. My main goals is to entertain and educate people in the hopes that maybe getting them to pay attention to a mushroom, whether it disgusts them or intrigues them or revolts them, whatever they land on the sort of the gamut of human emotion, that they will want to learn more, or just that I can get them to stick around long enough that they might actually learn something. Because in the day and age of social media, things move so quickly and attention spans are so short that it's kind of special to be able to get people to stick around long enough to actually read the description on a video or read the caption in a video. And so it's very much the goal of what I try to do. And if you watch my videos on Instagram or TikTok, you'll see that illustrated. And like I said, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, iNaturalist, all sorts of stuff. I got a website too. You can check that out. There'll be more details at the end. So anyhow, my story. If you want to hear a longer version of specifically my story and some of these little stories, I just did a podcast last week. So about 35 minutes long of me telling stories about why I'm obsessed with mushrooms. But the short answer is there's a lot of threads. There's a lot of things that sort of weave this tapestry of passion throughout my life. I had a few finds of mushrooms as a kid. I saw a parrot mushroom when I was like 4 or 5. I was like, this thing's an alien mushroom. And my grandfather knew enough to be like, no, that's a parrot mushroom. And I was like, bullshit, it's not, it's an alien. He was right, it's a parrot mushroom. It's a Gliophorus or Gliophorus. And I have grown up and since come to really love parrot mushrooms and waxy caps, because it was one of those ones that sort of I remembered from being a kid. Found chicken of the woods as a kid, found puffballs as a kid, all this kind of stuff got me really interested. But then I became a teenager and immediately forgot about everything that I cared about as a kid. And so kind of forgot about mushrooms around age 11 or 12. But as it went, I found another avenue into the world of fungi, and that was through the science of fermentation and microbiology. And of course, it entered into that through the lens of beer. Because at age 7, I went to Belgium with my dad, and I remember him talking the whole time about this sort of double fermented cherry beer called Creek. And my dad's a microbiologist, so this was very par of the course for him, kind of thing to be excited about. A new kind of alcohol and a new fermentation, something that he was stoked on. But of course, he's always talked to me like an adult. So as a 7-year-old, I was like, okay, sure, Dad, whatever. But we got to Belgium, and I remember sitting there in this big plaza, and they brought out this beer to him, and it was like in this long, tall glass, and it was shiny and pink, and the light was going through it, and there's little droplets of moisture. And I was like, oh my God, Dad, what is that? He's like, Gordon, that's Creek. Oh, so I tried my first sip of that and was immediately in love with fermentation, with microbiology, with cherry beer. And you know, at age 7, he didn't let me have too many sips, but he let me have a few more, and it really inspired a lifetime of being interested in fermentation. And so a lot of my motivation for loving fungi has often come from food, right? I can eat it, tastes good, cool, I want more. Um, so my journey through life has been a little circuitous. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and while there, I got into home brewing, and that was again through the lens of beer into yeast. I did a lot of sailing and scuba, so I'm super passionate about the ocean as well. Coming out of Santa Cruz, I did some summer abroad programs at UC Davis and realized I was like, holy crap, people do science on food and beer and wine, and this is really cool. So I applied to UC Davis. It was my first choice, and it was also the only PhD program I got into. So it was kind of a good fit. I was like, okay, I only got into one PhD program, but this place really wants me. So I went there. And while at Davis, I did a lot of stuff. I was on this grad representative, like student leadership council, and we dealt with the UC Davis pepper spray incident and all sorts of crazy stuff. But I got to do wine tasting every week. I did a lot of cooking, some catering for my graduate group, learned a lot about food science and microbiome. And well, quite honestly, I just learned a lot about wine because I ended up joining a lab that was a wine lab. And so I got a ton of exposure to wine and wine microbiology and all the weird types of yeast and stuff that go into making wine, because in some ways it's much more diverse microbiologically than beer, which is usually just one strain of yeast, whereas wine is a huge mishmash of all sorts of bacteria and non-sec yeasts and stuff like that. So coming out of UC Davis, I was like, man, I say I got a PhD in wine, but I should probably go get some work experience at an actual winery. And I'd worked at a tiny winery in college in Santa Cruz, but it was like, you know, us kind of moving stuff around by hand. And I ended up going to Opus One, where I worked with Mycological, who's the winemaker there. And I did 2 harvests. I isolated some wild yeast strains, which they are now using as their house yeast strains. I did a lot of growing yeast up in sort of big tanks so that we could take yeast that I had isolated from the vineyard, grow that up inside the winery, and then pitch that into the wine instead of using freeze-dried yeast. So we were actively taking yeast from their own vineyards and putting that back in the wine. Pretty cool how that adds to this sort of terroir, the influence of the wine and its sense of place, because I'm taking the actual yeast from their physical vineyard versus shipping in yeast that was grown somewhere else and has a completely different genetic background. So I think that stuff's pretty cool. I also did sort of technical sales and some biotechnology stuff. So I was running around all the different biotech companies here in the Bay with process sensors and bioreactors. And I got to go some really cool places that were doing, using fungus kind of do next generation food science and agriculture and stuff like that. Places like Impossible Burger, which uses a pickea yeast to express this hemoglobin protein, which makes their veggie burger taste more meaty. So I got to see some really cool stuff and some interesting, there's a place called Wild Earth that makes like a koji based dog food, all cool stuff. But in the background of all this, right after I graduated Davis and right before I started working at Opus, I got into mushrooms. I got really into mushrooms. I was living in New Zealand, and it was a typhoon year. So my partner at the time was working at a winery like 12 hours a day, and I was bored. I was supposed to be writing. I didn't want to write, so I just went on hikes, and there was mushrooms everywhere. So the one that really kind of inspired me was this Agroscope parasitica. I think sometimes they call it Cyclobe. So I don't remember. Whatever. There's another genus name for this now, but this is a really beautiful edible mushroom that I saw in New Zealand and absolutely loved. And so I started taking pictures of that, and I realized pretty quickly, I was like, man, I am just abusing my normal friends with pictures of mushrooms every day. I got to start a mushroom only social media feed. And that's what I ended up doing with Instagram. And then that snowballed into all of these other social media things. Because once you realize how tenuous your hold is on social media, that someone else owns your platform and owns all your content, you're like, man, with one click of a key, I could be gone from the internet. So I decided to kind of diversify, try to spread myself, arguably spread myself too thin across many different platforms, but I'm trying to put myself out there, I guess, so people can learn about mushrooms. That is the goal. So as I learned, my process was very much a slow one. I had no context. I've never taken a mushroom class. I was living in New Zealand. I didn't even own a book. I was just using the internet. And that's usually what I tell people to start with, is instead of going out and buying a bunch of expensive books or taking classes, just start Googling stuff. And there's a really great website called iNaturalist, which has an app which allows you to take a picture of literally any living thing, upload it to the app. The app uses its free algorithm. It's always free. It will never charge you money. Don't pay for those apps that try to charge you money to identify a tree or a plant. It's a scam. iNaturalist will do the same thing for free. Plus, iNaturalist uploads the data and the photos to a sort of a metadata-based data set that scientists can access and help them use to look at climate change and the way that species are distributed and stuff like that. So you're doing a good thing. You're helping community science by using iNaturalist. And I think it's also sort of the best learning resource you can do when you're first getting started. And whenever someone sends me a photo of a mushroom, which I get several hundred requests a day, I usually say, have you uploaded your photo to iNaturalist? Because that's my first step. So that should be their first step too. But I've also been really, really lucky in that I've been able to build community. I've got a lot of help, a lot of guidance, a lot of just people, checking the work I do, right? Because I write these posts and I do my best to identify them, but frequently I'm wrong. And it's important that I go back and try to fix the mistakes I've made when I get good advice and good feedback from people, because there's people who know way better than me. And that's certainly been a humbling experience at times to realize how wrong I've been about something and to go back and try to fix it the best I can. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be able to teach the world about mushrooms, because I think they're awesome and I just want to share that passion. So let's get into talking about mushrooms instead of just me talking about myself. It's probably not that interesting. Mushrooms, though, are very interesting. So there's a big distinction that I think a lot of people miss, and that is the difference between a mycelium versus a mushroom. And in essence, mycelium is kind of like the body of the fungus. And the mushroom itself is really just like a reproductive organ. It's like a fruit or a flower. And so you can pick a mushroom without harming the mycelium below. And this is something that a lot of people misunderstand because they project as if mushrooms were plants, which means that if you pluck the mushroom, the plant dies. And that's not the way that mushrooms work. Mycelium is really complex stuff. It's, I'm gonna read this quote here because it's one of my favorite ones before I start trying to explain mycelium. But Merlin Sheldrake, who's the author of this great book, Entangled Life, said that mycelium is a way of life that challenges the animal imagination. And what he means by that is mycelium has nothing in common with us. There is no head, there is no feet, there's no arms. It is instead a diffuse network of every single leading edge basically being a brain unto itself, making decisions about its environment. And all of these hundreds of thousands of tiny little decision points happening are all somehow coordinated together in a meaningful manner. And then mycelium is not distinct either, because you can have mycelium from two different species all jammed up to each other and then associated with a plant and associated with bacteria and associated with other fungi. And it's just this incredible, crazy community down in the soil that as we try to comprehend it, we say stupid stuff like mycelium is like the internet of nature, which is a good gateway concept, but falls very, very short of describing the true importance, complexity, nuance of mycelium and its role in nature. And I know that there's certain people out there who say it's the internet of nature. Again, those people tend to overstate the case and overstate facts as if they were. You guys set up and think about this in an interesting way, and just emphasize too that there's a lot of nuance, and it's something that we still don't totally understand, but I think that's what makes it so interesting. So, like I said, mushrooms are the reproductive structure of that mycelium. Mycelium is made of hyphae. So these are sort of long, elongated fungal cells. And within those cells, those are made, the cell walls are made of a layer of chitin and glucans and proteins, all stacked on top of the lipid bilayer. So fungi have some pretty interesting stuff going on their cell walls and their capacity to interact with their environment, because unlike animals, if they experience a stress or something changes about their environment, they can't go anywhere. They're kind of stuck in it. They live in their food. And that's another good point too, because fungi don't have a stomach. They don't internalize things. They excrete stuff to then absorb it. So they're essentially like living in their dinner at all times. And so that makes them pretty interesting and pretty different from us too. But just to put these fungi and the fungi kingdom into context for you, here's sort of an overview of the three domains of life. So we have the archaea and the oh god, I'm blanking. Whatever. There's another sort of single-celled, like extremophile type of thing, and then we have all of the archaea bacteria and eukarya. And you can see here animals, fungi, and plants are sort of the end of this evolutionary tree. And if you look at this, you'd say, well, animals and fungi are close together than plants. And that's true by about 5 million years. But there's still about 43 million years worth of evolution between animals and fungi. So again, there's people out there who say, animals and fungi are so close, but they kind of lack the understanding of evolutionary biology and taxonomy. Sometimes oversimplify things by saying animals and fungi are similar. What they do have in common is some animals like bugs and crustaceans use that chitin compound in their cell membrane or as exoskeletons. So that is something they do have in common with fungi. But again, not all animals use chitin. And the really big difference there, and when people project and say mushrooms are plants, and that's one of the things that kills me a little bit on the inside, because up until about the 70s, science considered mushrooms plants, which is so vastly wrong and so incredibly, I don't know, it just shows how little scientists actually understood about the natural world, even though we thought we knew what was going on by 1970. Mushrooms and animals are heterotrophic, and they're catabolic, so they break down sugars to create energy, whereas plants are autotrophic, so they use the light of the sun to build sugars themselves and then use them. And so those are very different metabolic modes, and that is one of the biggest splits there between plants versus animals and fungi. So here's a little bit of general fungal biology. Like I was talking about, this is sort of another figure that gets at what's going on here at a cellular level. We have these cell membranes in fungi. They're very dynamic, very adaptable. They can add all sorts of cholesterols and proteins and different things to membranes, polysaccharides, to influence how they're able to move through the environment, whether they can like penetrate into something or they're protecting themselves from something. And then, the mycelium is sort of that body, that vegetative growth phase. And then the fruiting body, the mushroom itself, is the sexual stage generally of the mushroom. Although some mushrooms can also put out, asexual vegetative spores, which is also cool that fungi can do that. There's sort of three main modes that fungi fall into. There's actually, this should say saprobic. The word saprophytic is actually an old misnomer that infers that mushrooms are plants. So I need to change this slide because it should say mushrooms are saprobic, not saprophytic. This is just a nerdy side note for me. And saprobic means that you are breaking down dead stuff. So they're eating dead leaves, dead wood, boom. There's parasitism, where instead the fungi are attacking a plant and potentially then killing it and eating it. So some fungi are parasitic and saprobic. And then you have mycorrhizal mushrooms, and these are what are called ectomycorrhizal. So those are living in symbiosis, and it's not a pure sort of altruistic symbiosis. It's a little bit more like a push and pull antagonism that ends up benefiting both the fungi and the plant. But if that balance between the antagonism gets thrown off, the fungi can become parasitic, or the plant can just kick the mushroom out and say, I don't need you. I've got enough nitrogen and phosphorus and other things. So these are sort of tenuous and interesting relationships that exist within nature. So fungi goes through, mating cycle, it's mycelium, and it can either reproduce asexually or reproduce sexually, depending on how it wants to do its business. And a lot of fungi will do both, depending on the conditions. So here's some more divisions when we look at mushrooms. We've got basidiomycetes, where their spores are on sort of a club-like thing with the spores on the end, and those basidia hang down from gills, and the spores come off the gills. And then there's ascomycetes, where the spores are instead housed in sort of a sac, and then that sac will rupture, ejecting spores in something like a cup fungi or a morel. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is what I did my PhD on, and is what brews beer, wine, bread, all that stuff is actually an ascomycete fungi. And I think that's kind of cool because ascomycetes embody not just mushrooms, but also yeast, at least the yeast that we use. Here's an example of a mushroom, this Dendrocolibia racemosa, which does both asexual and sexual reproduction at the same time. And I think this is really cool. This is a tiny little mushroom that grows on big, dead, blackened rustlers. So it's already sort of parasitic, growing on something else. And these little nubs on the stipe produce conidia asexual spores, and then the gills under the cap produce sexual spores. So it's doing both modes of reproduction at one time, which I think is really cool. There's another thing I want to go over, which is the difference between ectomycorrhiza and arbuscular mycorrhiza. So people usually just say mycorrhiza and kind of move on with it. And one of the important things to keep in mind is that only about 4% of plants on the planet are ectomycorrhizal. So that means they produce mushrooms. About 85% of plants on the planet are arbuscular mycorrhizae, and arbuscular mycorrhizae are in Glomera mycota, this genus right here, and they do not produce mushrooms. So when we talk about mycorrhizae, we're frequently mostly just talking about arbuscular mycorrhizae, and there's a difference between how it like lives inside of plant cells versus living in between plant cells. It's technical, but again, what we care about as mushroom people and as foragers are generally just the ectomycorrhizal mushrooms, because those are the sort of big ticket things like chanterelles and porcini. So we talk a little bit more about these lifestyles that they lead. And I've sort of mentioned parts of this as I've been going, but the mycorrhizae, the ectomycorrhizal stuff, is the big ticket items like the porcini, the chanterelles, some mushrooms that we really, really like to eat. And, you know, those are generally in symbiosis. You have stuff that are, these are plants, actually, these are mycoheterotrophic associations. So these are plants that are living sort of semi-parasitically on mushroom mycelium. And it's been considered often that these microheterotrophs were sort of pure parasites and they didn't really understand why they existed. And now they're starting to realize that these parasitic plants are actually helping to spread the mushroom mycelium even further so that they access a wider network. Essentially, they're acting as nodes to help extend the range of the mycelium. So again, this is all something where like mycelium is taking a toll on the tree. There's a microheterotroph taking a toll on the mycelium, but as they all work together and have these like kind of push and pull relationships, they end up helping each other out. And I think that's really cool because nature has kind of figured out a way to make it all work together. There are purely parasitic fungi. So there's stuff like hypomyces and these little powder tops, which eat other mushrooms and are often like fairly toxic. And so you should avoid mushrooms covered in hypomyces because they're usually not good. Unless, of course, you've got a lobster mushroom, which is covered in an edible hypomyces and turns a nasty russula into a pretty good edible. So there's an exception to every rule in fungi. And I think that's one rule I can tell you with full confidence is there's always an exception in fungi, and any rule you hear is probably bullshit because there's another thing that'll completely blow out of the water. So that's a good thing to remember. We have things that are very antagonistic of plants. So we have just pure plant pathogens like the cedar apple rust, which is this totally unreal looking weird fungal growth. We have Eustolago matus, the corn smut fungus, which is funny because in Mexico, this thing is it's called a corn truffle and it's really highly regarded. And here in the United States, we spray hundreds of thousands of tons of fungicide on our cornfields every year to prevent this from happening, even though this is arguably like a much better food source than any corn that we grow. Oh well. And then you have things that are just purely friggin' parasitic, like honey mushrooms, Armillaria. Armillaria are really parasitic and then saprobic mushrooms that go around and kill trees. They have weaponized mycelium called rhizomorphs. So they are mycelium, which is normally like fluffy and white, gets hardened and blackened and is full of melanin and will creep through the soil and creep up between the bark of trees and girdle the tree. So it cuts off the xylem and the phloem and then eats the dead tree and then goes out and kills more trees. So honey mushrooms, if you see them in your yard, you can say goodbye to your trees. They're probably already dead. And there's also stuff called endophytes. So there are fungi that live in between plant cells. This is not inside of a plant cell, it's the interstitial space in between cells. And fungi will sometimes set up inside of that space and live inside of a plant for many years. And if that plant gets stressed out, sometimes that fungi will then come out of being an endophyte and go to be saprobic. And that's actually how morels work. So morels are endophytes inside of their host trees. When the tree experiences some stress, the mushroom will go from an asexual endophytic stage into a sexual saprobic stage and produce mushrooms. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so we have a huge diversity of mushroom fruiting bodies. We've got stuff like truffles, which are hypogeous fungi that live underground as an adaptation to low moisture environments. We've got some of the ascomycete fungi I was mentioning, like morels and cup fungi and cordyceps. We've got the gastroid fungi. So there's like earth stars and puffballs and stinkhorns and bird's nest fungi, some of that weird stuff. We've got polypores and jelly fungi and crusts that grow on dead wood. There are lots of claviloid mushrooms, so the coral, rumeria, little finger mushrooms, clubs you'll see. You've got mushrooms with gills. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of diversity of those. They're not all related, but frequently they will look fairly similar. And then you've got mushrooms with little pores underneath, and those are called boletes that are fleshy. There's even versions of boletes that have evolved gills, and there's versions of gill mushrooms that have evolved pores, because everything kind of goes back and forth and there's a lot of convergent evolution. And again, if you try to classify fungi, they don't care because they don't give a shit about our taxonomy. Fungi just want to be fungi and they're going to do what they do. So There's a huge diversity of fungi around the globe. Generally in areas that are warm and wet, there's a much higher biodiversity of mushrooms. So areas like the cloud forests of Ecuador, Southeast Asia, parts of Indonesia, even the East Coast of the United States have high biodiversity of fungi. And just because there's high biodiversity doesn't mean you have big mushrooms. Some of the biggest mushrooms actually occur in temperate areas where there's big differences between the wet and dry seasons, and that allows a lot of organic matter to build up, and thus the mycelium to grow and eat more organic matter before it produces a mushroom again. So that's why on the West Coast we get some very large mushrooms, whereas on the East Coast there's more diversity, but the mushrooms are generally smaller. And then if you went to like the cloud forest of Ecuador, there's tons and tons and tons of diversity, but all the mushrooms are microscopic. And I think if you look at it, there's estimated to be about 14,000 species of mushrooms that we've classified. But overall, there's probably upwards of like 3, 4, 5 million species of fungi around the globe. So that's including a lot of the yeasts and molds and other things that are out there. And probably that, we've described 14,000 mushrooms. It's estimated probably about 40,000 species of mushrooms. And even like the concept of species in fungi is kind of like loose. So like those numbers could be all over the place, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of scale. There's a lot of biodiversity out there that we don't even know about yet. Every time you take a piece of soil and sequence it, you find new mushrooms or new fungi. Happens like clockwork. So what's the role of fungi in soils? They are carbon recyclers. So generally in this sort of atmospheric nitrogen and carbon cycle, the role that bacteria are playing is to degrade protein and nitrogen, and then also fix nitrogen. Legumes will fix nitrogen into their nodules. Fungi, though, are really keyed in for degrading carbon and complex carbon. So they take polysaccharides, complex linkages, and they break them down to help make soils, basically. The other thing that fungi do is really, really important for like terraforming our planet was mycelium grows into little cracks. When that mycelium gets wet, it swells up. And what happens if you filled a bunch of little cracks with mycelium and that swells? Well, it cracks that. So that's how a lot of the rock on this planet ends up getting broken down. It's because there's sort of mycelium that's in there and it ends up cracking it off. And so much of the soil matter that we have is very much attributed to the presence of fungi on this planet, and how we built soil on this planet is very much the story of how fungi and plants colonize land. So because of that, because they've played such a central role in terraforming our planet, there's real promise for us to look to fungi as bioremediators and rehabilitators of our environment and all the damage that we've done. White rock fungi have some really powerful enzymes which might help break down different types, specifically carbon compounds, hydrocarbons, stuff like oil spills. However, there's people out there who say, oh, we can get oyster mushrooms to eat oil in a lab and we've solved oil spills. And the problem is, if you stick mushrooms that you've gotten to eat oil in a lab and you put them out in nature, they won't eat oil in nature because there's other stuff for them to eat. Oil is like a last resort. They'd have to do all this complex genetic programming to get that to work. And so trying to use fungi as bioremediators of like Superfund sites and oil spills and stuff like that, we're still a long way off. And my friend made a really good point to me, because he was like, people keep thinking it's like, oh, if we get fungi to degrade plastics, that'd be kind of the holy grail, right? It's a complex carbon source. Fungi could eat all the plastic in our environment, and then we wouldn't have to worry about it, right? We'd be fine. The mushrooms just take care of us. The problem is, if we actually got a mushroom that could eat plastic, our society would fall apart as we know it. Because so much of what we do is based on plastic. Our technology, our medicine, our cars, everything we own is plastic or some form of hydrocarbon. And so if there was suddenly a fungus out there that could digest all that plastic, yeah, sure, we'd get rid of all like maybe the bottles in the ocean, although I'm sure we put more there than the fungi could ever really eat. But we might lose access to all of this technology. We go back to everything being like wood and metal and glass. And that doesn't sound like the future to me. So it's just things to be aware of, things to think about. Fungi are absolutely everywhere. So they definitely are at every interface in life and play really important roles, like I was talking about in terms of forming soils. There's this great mushroom called a Pizolithus diball, which is a really good mycorrhizal partner to a lot of plants. It's absolutely essential for pine trees if you want to like plant them in areas that have been like stripped of all soil nutrients and other things. You get pine trees to establish with Pisolithus, and Pisolithus, this diabol, can put about 80 pounds per square inch of force. So I've seen it pushed up concrete. It's a common thing in a lot of garden mixes. And so you'll see like edges of garden beds and stuff, like you'll see like wood getting lifted up by one of these Pisolithus coming out. And I think that's pretty cool. I guess one more thing to that note is as fungi push out of the ground, what they're doing is not just producing a mushroom, but they've also now aerated the soil. So now as water, rains on an environment, if you have some mushroom holes, the water drains down in those mushroom holes right to the mycelium. Again, keeping water in the soil and showing you how important mycelium is for that sort of soil microbiome, because the water is being held onto and the soil is being aerated by the presence of these mushrooms. Fungi in agriculture, really important. There's endophytic fungi and bacteria that can essentially convey all of the same things that you would get from genetic engineering or using pesticides. You can confer pest resistance, you can confer salt tolerance, all this kind of stuff. So if we had a better understanding of endophytes in plants and applied that to agriculture, we could probably use a lot less pesticides, a lot less fungicides, put a lot less chemicals into our environment, and potentially be, I think there's a point where we're going to need GMOs, but we could certainly get away from using GMOs in a lot of contexts if we just paid better attention to the microbiome of our plants. You can do mushroom cultivation at home. Stuff like mushroom kits are a really quick and easy way to start growing mushrooms. There's a lot of saprobic mushrooms. You can't grow ectomycorrhizal mushrooms at home because you don't have a tree that is going to play host to those mushrooms, but stuff that grows on dead stuff, that's saprobic. It's easy to cultivate and you get lots of kits. I particularly like kits from North Spore and Far West, and it's relevant to you guys, I just found a company in Canada that sells kits, and I'm going to try to get a discount code for them because I think shipping kits from the United States to Canada is absurdly expensive. And so hopefully I can find a Canadian company that'll ship them to you guys for a little bit less. But there's a ton of great farms, ton of great suppliers. You don't need to use any of my discount codes. You can just find like a local mushroom farm, ask them to get some kits. It's a great way to start just growing mushrooms at home and doing fun stuff. So you can also get really into it. The kit is sort of the first step, the starter kit, but you can get into doing your own pasteurization of straw and buying grain spawn and inoculating large scale projects. It's a great one. My club every year has a thing where we boil like 2 giant bales of straw, and we get a couple of bags of grain spawn, and we have an event where we bring everybody out, and we give them bags, and they just mix up the pasteurized straw with some oyster spawn. They stuff it in bags, they poke a couple of holes, tape it off, boom, like a month you've got mushrooms grown out of it. So there's a lot of different levels of cultivation you can do at home, at the lab. You can sort of ramp up to being like a mini farm, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I encourage you to check it out, and there's a lot of great tutorials on YouTube if you want to learn more. You can also do outdoor mushroom cultivation, where you build your own beds or you inoculate logs. I grow wine caps in my own backyard. I put them in all my garden beds because they're, like I said, really good at hanging on to moisture. So I live in California where it's super dry and water is very expensive and often rationed out. So I really like that I'm able to use this wine cap spawn in my garden beds because it really helps the water stay in. And I had a fantastic tomato crop this year in a bed where every time I watered the tomatoes, I'd essentially also get mushrooms, which was pretty cool. So it's a good way to supplement what you're getting out of your garden and build good soils all at the same time. Mycologists, like mushrooms, pop up absolutely everywhere. It's a really diverse mixture of people. There's academics, amateurs, and enthusiasts. And like the cool thing about mycology is that a lot of those amateurs and enthusiasts are basically the most serious mycologists that exist. Guys like David Aurora and Alan Rockefeller and even William Padilla Brown, they don't have college degrees. They just started learning and they are at the top of their field. And I think that's really cool. You've got cultivators and farmers and sort of citizen and community scientists and, glampers and off-grid people and hunters and, people coming from all walks of life. And I think it really it's a core curiosity that appeals to a lot of people because kids love it, old people love it. People of all different socioeconomic and racial backgrounds and stuff like that can find their way to a mushroom and get really excited. And I just think that's magical because there's not too many things in our world right now that can actually bring people together. It seems like everything is pushing us apart. And I think it's cool that fungi and mycelium and mushrooms in particular are something that help everybody kind of focus in on one thing. So for me, foraging and mushroom hunting is a huge part of why I'm fascinated by fungi. Some of the highest value mushrooms that are out there are truffles. The other really high value mushroom out there is a cordyceps. some of the ones that are harvested in Nepal, and the scarcity of those is part of why they're so expensive. But you can cultivate cordyceps, and so here in the United States, there's sort of a booming cottage industry of people who are growing cordyceps. And there's even a booming industry of people who are planting truffle farms, trufferys. There's quite a few of them here in California. I think some of them are finally starting to come online. I don't think we're going to see the price of truffles drop significantly anytime soon, because even with a farm, you have to pick a truffle and get it to a consumer within probably 2-3 days. Otherwise, the truffle loses a lot of its potency. Thus, the sort of limited lifespan of a truffle is part of what determines its cost, not just its scarcity. A lot of professional foragers, especially here in the United States, are immigrants. There's a lot of Southeast Asian immigrants, Lao, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and they do a lot of, if you see mushrooms in a grocery store that are foraged or wild mushrooms, they probably came from immigrant families that are working very hard, not getting paid enough to go out and hunt those mushrooms because there's a lot of middlemen in the way. And if you want to learn more about that sort of life of the immigrant foragers and just foraging and sort of the mushroom cash business, because apparently I think it's the second largest cash business in the United States, or at least North America. There's this book, The Mushroom Hunters by Langdon Cook, which is really phenomenal and very engaging. And there's a lot of competition and secrecy, and I think Langdon tells a great story about that. But if you don't want to become a professional forager, that's fine. You just want to go look for some cool mushrooms, join the Mycology Club, and that's why we're here. So I think that's something that you guys already know about. But there's local ones, and then there's like national ones as well. So we have like NAMA, which is the North American one, and if you're not a member of that, you can become a member of that and check out some forays in different places and get access to different speakers and some background on stuff if you're really passionate and just want to kind of do everything fungi. There's a great segment of mushroom arts and crafts, which is something I didn't know about when I first got into it. But you can make all sorts of cool dyes out of mushrooms. There's some mushrooms that are not edible, but will dye fabrics just fine. Stuff like dyer's polypore, jack-o'-lanterns. So you can make all sorts of cool textiles and paper and other things where you want to dye stuff. These mushroom flat lays, my friends Sada and Heather do some really amazing ones. I absolutely love their work. They go out into the woods and they just get so creative and so artistic in a way that, I can like take one mushroom and put it on top of another mushroom and take a photo, but like doing stuff like this just blows my mind that they get into it. So, and then my SOMA, which is my local club, every year, well, last 2 years we had to cancel camp because of COVID, which is really unfortunate, but usually we have a big fiber arts component to camp, and there's people who do some really cool work there and dye fabrics and all sorts of stuff. So the arts and craft and sort of mushroom inspired stuff is all really exciting to me. And so here I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the choice edible mushrooms I find here in California. Hopefully most of these look familiar to you, but they may not, and I don't know what grows down here and doesn't grow up there. But I'd assume we have a fairly similar mixture because we're sort of on the same West Coast continuum. So here's a chanterelle. It's a golden chanterelle. This is probably Cantharellus formosus or possibly Cantharellus californicus, which is the giant golden one we get down here. This is a matsutake, the white one here in the top middle. And you can tell it's a matsutake because it has this sort of sandy bottom. It has like a fuzzy partial veil that's coming away, has sort of brown stuff on the side, and has a very distinctive seafood, cinnamon, kind of high chemical note smell. And it's an absolutely delicious mushroom, but it's not so good if you fry it up in a pan straight up. I really instead prefer to put it in like soup or rice dishes, kind of a wet cooking method. Or even potentially a tempura fry on this matsutake is amazing. It's a very, very highly regarded culinary mushroom in Japan, but it's one here in the United States that a lot of people don't totally understand and don't necessarily appreciate. But here in California, we get lots of them, especially under tan oak. So when it's season, you can go and get a bunch of them, which is cool. These bright orange ones in the top right are lobster mushrooms. These are the Hypomyces lactiflorum. I mentioned it earlier. It is a base Russula or Lactaria species that gets infected with Hypomyces, which is a mold that normally makes things inedible, but in this case, it makes it more edible and actually makes it tastier. There's a really cool paper out there where they look at like the genetic and metabolic changes that the Hypomyces induces in the mushroom itself. And how it injects its DNA like into mushroom cells to take over the programming of mushrooms. It's a cool read. Bottom left here, we have what I call the winter trio. As far as I know, that's a California term, and it may not be something that's gotten up to Canada, because I don't know if you guys have all these mushrooms in the winter. We hear these pinky ones are hedgehogs. So I know you have those. Hedgehogs have little teeth underneath, and those are super easy to ID. In the back here, there are Craterellus tubiformis, which is sometimes called the winter chanterelle or the yellowfoot chanterelle. It's a hollow, it's not super meaty like the Cantharellus. Craterellus instead are hollow, and they're really good, but you got to pick a lot of them to make it worthwhile. And then we have black trumpets, which is Craterellus calicornucopides, or yeah, we have the California version, otherwise it's just cornucopides. On the East Coast, it's Craterellus phalanx. But basically the black trumpets, the yellow feet, and the hedgehogs are three mushrooms that we get here on the California coast in winter. They're easy to ID, they're super delicious, and they tend to be pretty plentiful in a good year like this. So that's why I call it the winter trio. And those are three of the mushrooms I always recommend people learn if they want to go hunting. This big one, white one in the middle bottom is a lion's mane, Hericium arenaceus, and it grows on hardwoods usually. So I find them on oak here in Napa. It's phenomenally delicious. It is really good for you. There's a lot of health claims made about it. I don't put stock in those necessarily because there's people who will say it'll help you regrow brain cells and stuff like that. I haven't actually seen any clinical evidence that speaks to that, but I will say that they're absolutely delicious. They're one of my favorite edible mushrooms, and I think there's nothing wrong with eating lots of it, but I wouldn't go out and buy a bunch of like tinctures and pills because I think that's probably a waste of your money. I would go buy like a lion's mane kit and grow your own, or if you have access to buying some, just go buy $50 worth of lion's mane instead of a bottle of pills and eat it, feed it to your friends. You'll get more benefit from doing that than you would from taking supplements. And then the bottom right is the classic porcini, the king bolete. And here in California, we have Boletus edulis var grand edulis. And so it's a mouthful, but that is the porcini species that we get under pine. We also get some called queen boletes, which are a little bit browner on top. Those fruit under tan oak. So we have some really great edible mushrooms here in California. We also have some deadly ones. Just show you guys this for a little bit of contrast. So there's Amanita phalloides, which is this awful green, sickly looking mushroom with a really well-defined stipe and a bulbous bottom. I've seen a lot more of this mushroom this year than I am comfortable with. I haven't seen very much of it the last couple of years, but because we've had such a wet year, I'm seeing it everywhere, which terrifies me because this mushroom is invasive. It's not native to North America. It's from Europe. So the fact that we're seeing death cap Amanita phalloides spread all around North America is not good, because I think it's displacing native species and it's deadly toxic. So we don't want more of that mushroom. The flip side of that is the Western destroying angel, Amanita ocreata, which is a native mushroom. It belongs here in California, and it's not spreading the way that the death cap is. I see it in the same trees every year, same place, same time. It's deadly, but I don't have to worry about it as much because it's not spreading the way that the death cap is. There's also Galerina marginata, the funeral bell. Galerinas and amanitas contain a toxin called amatoxins, which are small peptides that when you consume them, they get down into your liver and they bind up RNA polymerase II, which is a really important enzyme that basically makes your liver work. So if you sequester all of this RNA polymerase II, your liver stops working and you get really sick, and you can sustain a lot of organ damage and all sorts. It's a really, really painful way to die because you're fine for like 24 hours and you get really sick, then you get slightly better, and then you die. So if you are anywhere near these things that contain amatoxins, be very careful. It's not something that is going to diffuse through your skin, so you can touch these mushrooms safely, but you certainly do not want to consume them. You don't want to put them in a basket with edible mushrooms. You really don't want anything to do with these mushrooms that contain amatoxins. So it's really important to be able to ID them and then just be careful with them. And there's some Lepiota species which are actually pretty common in garden beds and woodchip beds. And some of those Lepiota species can also contain amatoxins. So just a thing to be aware of, there's not that many deadly toxic mushrooms, but the ones that are deadly toxic, if you don't know what you're doing, can really screw you up. So there's now a home test for amatoxins. If you go to amatoxtest.com, you can order essentially a little pregnancy test kit that you can test mushrooms for presence of amatoxin. Which would be a good thing if your dog ate a mushroom in the yard and you're freaking out, you can take a piece of it, see if it has amatoxin. And if it does, take that dog to the vet immediately, call poison control, all the things you do. And if it doesn't, you can be like, fine, the dog just ate a mushroom, and if it wants to puke, let it go puke, but it's not going to die, So I'll drop here into the questions and just some quick tips for you guys. Download Seek or iNaturalist. inat.org is a website you can use. It's a great way to scout out new hunting locations and to catalog your finds. Join your local mycology society, which you guys have already done, but NAM is a good one too. Don't be afraid to get out into the woods and just explore. You know, you don't have to take anything home. You don't have to touch anything. You don't have to lick anything. You don't have to do anything other than potentially take a picture and just try to learn one mushroom every time you go out. That's what I do. Every time I go out, I try to learn one new thing if I can. And then you can also use stuff like Facebook forums for extra help with IDs. And then I also have an FAQ link on my website. So if you want to see the resources I'm mentioning or some of the answers to the things I've talked about, you can check out my website and FAQs. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll take some questions from you. See, I can also look at the chat here and see. Oops, too far.
Thank you so much for that, Gordon. That was absolutely amazing. So far, the feedback that's coming back, everyone's super, super stoked about it. So you've covered so many different categories, which is it's so wonderful to kind of have that in a crash course of the fantastic world of fungi. Like, it's just so vast and it covers so many different categories. So I'm grateful that you were able to do all of that for us tonight.
Sure. Yeah, that went on a little bit longer than I meant to, but yeah, now I'll do some cooking.
Honestly, I feel like everyone's quite happy about that so far.
Okay, good. Good.
Jazz, I think you added a bunch of questions to the chat in there. Kurt, are you getting some of those?
Yeah, I can see some of these, so I'll start answering them here.
Okay.
Yeah, so the oyster mushrooms, someone asked, are they carnivores? And the answer is no, they're not carnivores, but oyster mushrooms and bluets and wine caps, and there's a number of different mushrooms that do this, do hunt. So they are generally getting all of their sugars and carbon from wood, but wood is not a very good source of nitrogen, and fungi still need nitrogen because they're made of proteins and all the other stuff. So what they do is they put out these little lassos into the wood, like a cowboy lasso, and then a worm, a nematode, will sort of slither on by and activate the lasso, and it'll pull tight, and then that lasso will suck all the nitrogen out of the nematode. So there are mushrooms that hunt small microscopic worms to supplement their nitrogen when they're growing on nitrogen poor substrates like wood. Doesn't mean they're carnivores; they're still eating saprobically the wood, but they do supplement by eating worms. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, isn't the main one that I know of is Lacaria and Mephisto occidentalis, which is actually inedible for us as well.
Yeah, I get a lot. I didn't know that did that too, but that makes sense.
I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I feel like that's the one that keeps popping up for me this past year. So
I know that. Yeah, I think bluets do something weird with their mycelium too, that they can like eat bacteria or something as well. And right now in Napa, I've been finding tons of that Lacaria and bluets. They're just everywhere. So like anytime I go around live oak, it's all little purple mushrooms underneath.
That's really cool. Very beautiful. Yeah. Any other questions? I know there were a couple others there.
Yeah, someone had asked, is that why morels show up after fire? Yes, morels are endophytes that live in a host tree. Once the tree gets stressed out, the morels will become saprobic and go back to the forest floor and try to like inoculate the new generation of trees after a fire. Or, if it grows in an apple orchard, it's usually when the apple is dying that the morels come out and fruit really heavily. They will still fruit a little bit when there's not that stress, but they fruit a lot more when their host tree is dying. We did record this, so someone can watch it later. Someone said, I heard you can touch any mushroom safely. Is this true? So to Travis on Facebook, there is one mushroom called the fire coral, which grows in like Australia and Japan and a few other places. And that has a compound in it that can cause some like severe contact dermatitis. And if you were to eat it, there's a neurotoxin in it, so that can really mess you up. But other than that, pretty much every mushroom across the planet is generally safe to touch. Again, you don't need to like take the mushroom and like rub it all over your body to see if something weird will happen. But generally you can pick something up, look at it, poke it, and you're going to be fine. It's okay,
Yeah. On that note, like in past years during the annual show, I'll pick up the death cap and I'll be handling it all day for a wet, like between 4 to 8 hours, and showing it to people. And I don't wash my hands in between there. And so far I'm still alive and I haven't had any gastric distress or severe sinus issues.
Yep.
So
yeah, and that's good because the amatoxins they're proteins, so they don't go across skin, right? And that's the big thing, is the toxins that are in mushrooms don't cross the skin barrier. I wouldn't go ahead and like rub oil all over my hands and then potentially touch certain ones, because I don't know, you don't want to mess with the chemicals there. But
and hand sanitizer too, because that kind of, the alcohol opens the pores a little bit. So
it could.
Just be smart about it, really.
Yeah, just be, wash your hands. That basically, just wash your hands. And we have guys here in the Bay Area who love to do the thing where they take a death cap and they take a big bite of it just to make a point and then spit it out. Don't do that. Don't do that. Because I had one guy who told me, like, I did that with the death cap, but then it kind of like crumbled in his mouth. So he's like, then I went and had to like go floss and like, why? And I was like, dude, just don't do that. Like,
that's
there's no reason to take that risk,
No. And I believe one of our members has like had some remnants left behind in their mouth, and then they had severe gastric distress. So unless you rinse your mouth after and that sort of thing, you just never know. So like, why risk it, right?
Yep, totally.
Anyway, what else have you missed here yet?
Someone asked me, what's the preferable habitat for cauliflower, which is Spiraceus. On the West Coast, I think cauliflower is growing generally with Doug fir or with pine, and it'll fruit fall to winter from what I've seen. If you guys, I don't know, Vancouver Island, you guys probably get a lot of like summer fog and stuff like that. So I assume that some of like summer and early fall is some of your best mushroom season. And you'd probably see Spiraceus and chanterelles at that point, lobster mushrooms, etc.
Rarely though, and I know that the Spiraceus here on the island is actually getting pretty rare because it's mostly correlated with older growth forests, and those are disappearing right now. So yeah.
That's unfortunate. I know there are some people who cultivate Spiraceus, but I haven't found a kit that fruits consistently. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think there is some places that grow it commercially, but again, they're always being really small. It's not like the huge ones. Terry from Facebook had asked me, can you still find chanterelles on the West Coast? Yeah, of course. I started finding chanterelles in about mid-August, and was picking 5-10 pounds every time I went to this one spot up until about halfway through November. Someone had asked, are ghost pipes an indicator species? So ghost pipes, the Monotropa uniflora, are usually associated with rustler species as far as I know. And then there's the what's it called, the candy cane, or Allotropa virgata, sugar sticks, that's it. Those are associated with Matsutake. So yeah, a lot of microheterotrophs have a mushroom partner. Sugar sticks are, I think, the only one that really tells you like, hey, there's edible mushrooms here. And I've certainly seen that association. When I found sugar sticks, I found Matsutake there in the fall. And then someone asked, are there any sound studies done on micromediation that I know of? No. As far as I can tell, no one has actually done a rigorous scientific study on micromediation. And that leaves it open because a lot of people who are these kind of permaculture hippie people who don't understand scientific design have done things where they say, oh, look, we ate cigarette butts and we ate oil and we did this and we've solved all these problems. You're like, yeah, but like this doesn't work when you take it outside of the experimental setting that you've put up here. Which is why I'm still kind of skeptical. It doesn't mean that I don't support this and want to figure it out. It just means that I don't want to declare victory over, oil spills and stuff like that too soon, because I think when people hear that kind of stuff and they hear that news, they just assume that someone is going to figure it out and the problem is solved, and they stop caring. And that's why I sort of say, we can't count on the microremediation yet. We have to keep working on it. There is some really cool work happening. I'm just waiting for it to enter the academic and kind of sciencey sphere instead of it being on the margins of what I believe to be true or not true.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions here?
Yes. I can't keep up anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
So there's Rick D, who says, as a fellow homebrewer, have you used candy caps or other mycofauna as a hopping component? Saw a porter homebrewed with candy caps on a fungal Facebook page recently.
Yeah, totally. So in college, way before I ever even got into mushroom hunting, there was a brewery in Santa Cruz that I used to volunteer at called Uncommon Brewers, and they made a red ale with candy caps, and that was my first experience running into candy caps. It was phenomenal, but if you drank more than 2 of them, you would wake up in the morning stinking like maple. which wasn't the word. It was better than smelling like vodka, but yeah, it's still pretty noticeable. And I've had beers brewed with chaga, with candy caps. I've thought a long time about trying to brew like a savory porcini porter, but I kind of gave up on brewing a long time ago because I realized I'd be a better microbiologist than a brewer. So I learned a lot about beer and wine production, but I stopped actually doing it myself. But this year I picked as many candy caps as I could because my favorite brewery in Davis said that if I brought in like a whole jar of candy caps, he'd make a candy cap beer. So I am definitely going to do that.
Yummy.
Yeah.
Another question, does mycelium migrate, and specifically does oyster mushroom mycelium migrate from tree to tree?
Well, honey mushroom mycelium does that. That's what rhizomorphs are that I talked about. As far as I know, oyster mushrooms don't do that. If they're getting onto a new tree, it's via spores.
And it has to be a dead one too, right? So
it doesn't have to be dead. I
is
mean, it has to just be it has to be access to dead wood, and often in the inner heartwood of trees is dead.
Right.
And like again, there's a park here in Napa where I see a ton of lion's mane and oyster mushrooms and jack-o'-lanterns and honey mushrooms, all things that kill trees. So the trees are very sick because they're all dying of the sudden oak death. So sudden oak death is this Phytophthora ramorum. It's a invasive pathogen, mycete kind of thing. It's kind of like malaria/AIDS for trees. So it doesn't kill the tree outright, but it reduces the immune system. And then when the immune system's down, all these invasive fungi can get in and start eating the tree as it's dying, kind of thing. And then you see them fall down because the fungus has kind of completed killing the tree.
So just to note, because it's always a discussion,
yes.
We don't officially have candy caps, nor do we have jack-o'-lanterns to date on this island.
Yep.
So, and I don't think we even have that in BC. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have those on BC as well. They haven't made their way up north. Yeah, I know. I mean, it was the one thing that I first also, when you open a book, like that's usually the first thing that will come up and like, this is a great edible. But we don't officially have it. We have many Lacteria species that look very, very similar. And there's around 4 or 5, and we're always trying to figure them out. But just so everyone knows, not yet.
Candy caps are one of those special things that California has that other people like. There's a little bit of them in Oregon, but we get way more in California than anyone else anywhere. So it is one of those special things about being here. Yeah. Yeah. You guys get mushrooms in the middle of July, and we are completely dry at that point.
Yes.
So there's a plus and a minus everywhere. The grass is always greener.
Yeah, we are very fortunate here. That's very true. Yeah, so you can everyone understands Cancerella species, you can sometimes find those goldens in the middle of July or even early July. What was it, last year or the year before in April, we actually had the yellowfoot pop up because we had this really weird cold spell. And all of a sudden you had all these winter chanterelles popping up and everyone was like, what the heck is going on? So yeah, you got to pay attention to the weather, right?
Cool. Well, let me, I'm going to sign off and go hop on my phone so you guys can have a minute or two.
I will entertain until you pop on, and then I will stop talking because you only have the one mic on, right?
Yep.
Sounds good. All right. So we already talked about a few things that I wanted to cover. See you soon. But some cool things someone mentioned online as well is that they enjoy eating the Russula vipi's mushroom, and that one actually doesn't have a lot of flavor for a lot of people, but you can consume it. Daniel Winkler on one of his webinars this past year mentioned he likes to cube it up and dry it and put it into hummus instead of chickpeas. So you kind of have to work through your own little ideas to figure out what you'd like to do with your mushrooms, I guess. I guess most of the questions have been finished at this point, right?
I think Sinclair had a question about pairing mushrooms.
Well, I do, but it's probably better after the cooking demonstration because we have a person with a wine background and a mushroom background. So my question is, what kinds of wines go well with mushrooms?
That's a really good question. I'm sure a lot of us want to stop experimenting and actually find that good pairing, hey? That's too true. What is someone's favorite mushroom that they've eaten that has an interesting flavor profile? Anyone come up with something interesting? Nobody? Has anyone
I
tasted?
had something
Yeah.
interesting, well, it was a neon pinkish red, actually pinker tipped Romaria. It was either Stuntzii or I forget off the top of my head what the other similar one is. If in fact it is one of those two, because who knows? But it was tasty.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've never
That's
tried.
what I say. It was good. It was easy. It was easy to pick and find.
Yeah. What did you make with it?
I find if I want to taste a fungus, especially something that's unusual, I don't mix it with anything.
Mhm.
I will perhaps grace it with some butter or ghee for final touch up after getting some of the moisture out of it.
Yeah, fair point. I made the mistake of actually cooking up my first matsutake just in the frying pan, and it really didn't taste that great. So I don't know if anyone else has had that experience.
I think they're awful.
Yeah, me too.
Everybody has that experience. That's why Gordon's suggestions of cooking it with rice, or particularly the way the Japanese do in a broth, sliced and barely cooked, is by far the best way to cook it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. See, I was going by textbooks that always warn you don't mix it with other rich foods when it's your first year experience, right? And so I made that mistake, not knowing.
Another way of preparing it is to take some aluminum foil and put a little bit of sweet wine or Japanese cooking wine and a bit of oil in, close up the aluminum foil and cook it in the oven at about 250 degrees for 20 minutes. And it's the same thing as cooking it in parchment paper, and it's quite good and easily prepared that way.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
Also good in miso soup.
Oh yeah, soup.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do
That would-
green is excellent. I do a green coconut curry,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be delicious too.
like with coconut milk.
Ah, yeah. Kind of soften up that kick in it.
You should ask Bill Weir what he found yesterday. As far as I know, he's the only person except Adolf and Luna who found this on Vancouver Island.
I found
Ooh.
Which
some
mushroom?
cordyceps.
Oh,
Cordyceps.
Yeah, Cordyceps
one?
militaris.
Out on the hill above Pearson College.
Yeah.
cool.
The dogs took me to it.
Did
They
you
take
figure
me
out
to
what
mushrooms all the time.
did you find out what kind of insect it had predated?
Oh, it's hard to
That's
tell.
it.
It's some sort of pupae, but it's almost decomposed.
Wow.
So that's why I kept it together in the moss, because I dissected one out and I left the other one in the moss. So it would sort of hold it together better.
It is a good aphrodisiac.
Yeah, they're so tiny. As they're drying out, they're just shrinking down into hairs.
Are you speaking from personal experience, Adolf?
Sure.
Okay.
I found another tree with Tuberia punicia also. So I'm up to 8 different trees with it on it this
Very
year.
Oh, this year alone, not even like over a
Well,
few years.
8 different trees that I found. 7 of them were in October. And then I found one yesterday. And then I found a repeat flushing on one of the same trees.
Very
now.
cool.
Yeah.
Are you sending
I
it?
collected them, Adolf. I'm drying them out.
I was just gonna ask too.
Thanks.
So I have 3 baggies with dried mushrooms in them now.
Sweet.
Hey, Melanie, are you ready for me?
Ah, is that you, Gordon?
That is me.
Yes. Hit it up. I think. Do I need to maximize
I think-
your?
You probably need to pin me as the speaker.
All right, I will do so. Pinned. Take it
Cool.
away.
Okay, I'm gonna plug my mic in, so I won't be able to hear you, but you'll be able to hear me much better.
Sounds good. And then Q&A to afterwards.
Okay, sounds good. And I just found out I can check the chat. So again, you can throw stuff in the chat and I'll check it once in a while, see if I can give you feedback. So
That's
what I'm
wonderful.
going to do, just as a heads up, I'm going to do a little overview of the mushrooms in front of you, some of the cooking projects in the back, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a sort of Korean style pancake for you guys. So that's what I'm doing. Probably. Okay. So hopefully you guys can hear me. If you are looking at me, please nod so I know that you can see me, or you can hear me and see my screen. What we have in front of us is a selection of mushrooms that I have foraged here around Napa recently. So we've got some bluets I mentioned. This is Clatospis nuda, beautiful purple gills, white spores. Find a lot of these under oak duff, live oak here in Napa. Also under the live oaks, I find Amanita villosa, which is my favorite edible mushroom. It's beautiful. This one's been out of the ground for a couple of days, so it's not quite as beautiful as it was, but has this sort of apricot salmon colored top with a white veil that comes off very nicely. It is an absolutely delicious edible Amanita, but it does have the deadly toxic lookalike of Amanita ocreata. So you want to be very, very careful and very, very sure when you go to eat that. In front of me, I also have, here's some Laccaria. This one's dried out a little bit. It's from a day or two ago. We have two kinds of candy caps here in California. We have Lactarius rufulus, which is oak associated and is darker and more chunky. And we also have Lactarius rubidus, which generally I find on the coast under Doug fir, tan oak, and pine. But I just realized recently that there are some that grow here in Napa. So I've got rufulus and rubidus, and the rufulus is not quite as strong in terms of the maple flavor, but the rubidus is very strong maple flavor. So these two candy caps, kind of cool to have them both. Here was an Oreo boletus, just a little bolete that I found, bright yellow pores. We've got some dried mushrooms here too. This has been a really phenomenal year for black trumpets. So I dried out some of the Craterellus calicornucopides. I also had a great year for black trumpets on the East Coast. So after several years of not finding any black trumpets, I found a lot of black trumpets this year. This is Agaricus augustus that I dried out. So this is a big edible agaric that smells like almonds. And so I'm probably going to powder this and use it for baking. And then I also have just a really big chunky bag full of dried porcini. So this is lots of king bolete. There might even be some queen bolete in here, but I'll powder this up and use it in my cooking. And I'll show you guys when I make this pancake what that looks like. So I also have a whole selection of just completely random projects that I pulled out of the fridge. I'll show you guys what I got. This is a fig and matsutake jam that I made, or not, is it jam, marmalade? I don't know. It was just a bunch of figs and matsutake that I cooked down together and blitzed them. But it's really good. It's sort of savory and has that matsutake high note with the sweetness of the figs, goes really nicely. This is a bunch of butter boletes that I preserved a couple years ago. So I boiled the crap out of them and then put them in sort of a slightly acidic solution with some spices, and then hot packed them to a jar, and hopefully they're still good. I made last year a chanterelle quince chutney. So when I had tons of chanterelles and I had tons of quince, I put them with a bunch of Indian spices and onion and cooked them down. And now this is a chutney that's pretty good on all sorts of stuff. You can bake with it. You can put it on turkey, whatever you want. Here's one of my absolute favorite mushroom preservation things. And these are yellow feet that I cook down in a sort of 2-to-1 sugar to water syrup. And then I also throw in a candy cap. So the candied yellow feet have sublime texture, and the little bit of candy cap flavor really brings this awesome maple element to them. So I put these on like biscuits or scones with butter. They're incredible on top of ice cream. You can put them in caramels. You can put them in cakes, cookies, muffins, whatever you want. Candied yellow feet are amazing. Let's see what else. We have a bunch of chanterelles that I did sort of a similar, like boiled them in sort of an acidic solution and then packed them with some oil and spices. And, I haven't opened these things because I'm not ready to open them until I have a bunch of people to share them with. Similar thing I did here with some Swillis a couple years ago. So I've got butter bleats, chanterelles, Swillis, all boiled in sort of an acidic solution, packed with spices and topped with some oil. These are the red elf cups or red elf ear things, Sarcosphaera, I think it is. But I pickled these. So these are sitting in a pickle mixture. I've never eaten one of these. So we're gonna, oh man, this is pretty well closed. I have not opened this in quite some time. But here we go. We'll do a taste test, and at the same time, you can see whether or not these are actually safe to eat, because I've never eaten one. Yeah, they're kind of falling apart at this point. Texture's not so great, but oh, nice. Tastes good. Oh, I'll put them in the salad. That's good. Maybe with some like steak tartare or something like that. Oh, this is another thing I really like. This is lobster mushroom butter. So when you get lobster mushrooms, there tends to be a lot of, they're kind of brittle and a lot of pieces break off. So when I'm processing lobster mushrooms, I'll take all those little extra pieces and I'll cook them down in some butter and add some, rosemary and bay and thyme and a clove of garlic. And the lobster mushrooms just turn this butter an incredible orangey color and add a really beautiful flavor. So sometimes I'll put this in eggs, or I'll just use it in the base of something else. I like the lobster mushroom butter. So yeah, those are a bunch of cooking projects I have. I'm going to go ahead and just show you really quickly how I'm going to put together some Korean pancakes for you. Clean this bowl out real quick. So this is a pretty classic kind of green onion pancake type thing that you see in Korean restaurants a lot as a starter. Sometimes if you go to Korean food, they'll even bring you one of these for free. So I'm going to use some green onion, some chives, some Korean style chives. Hang on, drop these out of here. Some of these, and some enoki. So those little white mushrooms you get at the Asian grocery store. And then I've got this Korean pancake mix, which is essentially just wheat flour with some seasonings in it, some MSG and some other stuff added. So it adds a little extra oomph. But you don't need much here. We're going to do some flour and some water, and we're going to just pour that right over our veggies that I'm going to saute real quick. So I got myself a spatula so I can do a good job scraping this all out of here. So I'm just hydrating my batter here. You can see I'm not measuring anything. I'm kind of just going by eye and by feel. And, if you want to, you can measure and you can follow directions, but I never do. I just kind of do stuff. Savory pancakes are very, very forgiving. You can essentially get away with doing whatever you want. Anything you want to put in there, it will probably work as long as you have some batter. If you want to add an egg to this, you can totally do that. It's not traditional necessarily, but it tastes great. And I do it all the time to add a little extra protein. So our batter looks pretty good. I think that'll be sort of thick/thin enough to a tiny bit of water here. Not much, but just a little bit more so that when I go to pour it, it will, so there we go, can kind of move around somewhat freely. And I'll just give that flour a few minutes to hydrate. So I'm going to go ahead and prep my veg real quick. Piled up all this stuff on my workstation. Now I don't have anywhere to put things, but we'll get through it. Okay, so here's a green onion from my garden. And I'm just going to run a knife through it real quick. And I like using both green onion and chives because they're going to bring slightly different flavors and textures to this pancake. And because I'm cutting them differently too, they will also be different. So that's what I'm doing. And just be careful, don't slice your fingers. I do a lot of live cooking, and you end up kind of distracted, and it's pretty easy to hurt yourself if you are distracted while you're cooking. So I highly recommend staying focused. If you have people in the kitchen with you, make sure that they understand what you're doing. And sometimes when you're using a sharp knife, that maybe they should give you a minute or two to not talk to you while you are handling a sharp knife. Save yourself. Dinner is a lot more fun when you don't need to do first aid. At least that's how I feel. Okay, so I'm gonna just cut these into 1.5 strips or something like that, something like this. So we got all that. Great. I'm gonna crack open my enoki here. Boom, here are my enoki mushrooms. So this is Flammulina velotips is the species. They are sometimes known as the velvet shank when they are wild. But when these are grown commercially, they grow them in the dark under high CO2. And so that causes them to grow really long and skinny and stay white, which is not their natural state. Because naturally, they would be short and squat and have, orangey brown tops and fuzzy feet. And I just think it's really cool that we can manipulate mushroom behavior to kind of give exactly what we want. And it really shouldn't be that surprising because we do with all sorts of other stuff. But I think it's just pretty cool that we figured out how to cultivate enoki in that way. So another thing I could do would be to just dip these in this batter and then fry them. So you can get crunchy little enoki, bits. But I'm gonna go ahead and make the pancake just because that's what I feel like doing. I was originally going to do something else, and then I decided to do a pancake because that's what I want to eat. And I have all these onions, and it's relatively easy to do. So I didn't want to do something that was too complicated, lest I screw it up or you guys not be able to do it at home. So I'm just showing you how to make this savory pancake. Okay. Great. I'm going to use the bigger pan. I've got a bigger pan. So I have a pan that I was like frying some stuff in, and I'm going to go ahead and just use that because there's a good amount of oil in here. So we're gonna heat this up. And one thing you want to do when you cook these Korean pancakes, it definitely helps to use a fair amount of oil. You want to get them really nice and crispy, and the Korean pancake will taste a lot better if there's a good amount of oil in there. So one thing I wanted to do, here's my secret addition to the recipe, is I've got some porcini powder. So this is just dried porcini that I put in the spice grinder, and I'm gonna add a little bit here for an extra boost of umami. There we go. Okay, so clip myself back in, stir in my porcini powder here. Nice bit of brown color and extra umami into our batter. All right. So take our wheel my island over the pan here, and bear with me while I reposition my camera. This is always a little bit of a process, but there we go. Okay. Mostly see what I'm going to be doing. All right. There we go. All right. Aha. If you like what I'm doing now, I have hours and hours and hours of me cooking on Instagram. So you can check out all my recipes and me talking quietly into a microphone and cooking mushrooms on Instagram. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to fry these gnocchi, get them kind of working in the pan here. And probably what I should do is, rather than crowd the pan, is just put in like a reasonable amount of ingredients and make 2 of these, rather than trying to make it too thick. Because I do that sometimes, it's kind of like trying to put too much in one taco and then your life gets too complicated. I had this great class in college where it was a sort of a writing class for science majors. And so we get some people expressing kind of weird things because scientists don't always know exactly what's going on. This guy had this one analogy where he was like, life is like a sandwich. And he's like, sometimes you go to the sandwich bar and you just see all the stuff. You're like, man, there's like ham and turkey and roast beef, and there's hummus and there's sprouts and there's beetroot and there's carrots. And like, you want to put everything into your sandwich because life looks so cool and there's so many awesome things that you want to do. But then you realize that your sandwich is inedible. You put too much crap in your sandwich and it just falls apart and gets really messy. And I was like, man, that's a really good analogy for life. and it totally fits with tacos too. But either way, I've learned that sometimes it's easier to simplify and focus, and that makes your sandwich / your life a little bit better than if you try to fit everything in there. So, okay. So I've got everything working in the oil here. I'm going to go ahead and pour in some batter and do my best to get the batter all over. I might need to make a little bit more batter for a second pancake, but that's okay. That is all right. Just get this whole thing. Boom. Okay. You see, like the amount of oil that's in there, it's kind of bubbling up, and that's good. We want it really all over this pancake. It's gonna taste a lot better. Some nice flavored oil in there with lots of tasty veg. And then what I'll do too is I'm gonna make a really quick dipping sauce with some probably just soy sauce, maybe a little chili oil, that kind of thing. So I'm just mixing up a little bit more batter for myself here. Okay, so a little bit of dipping sauce. So that's frying away. Good. Make sure I get all of the onions and everything else into our batter. Get everybody kind of integrated. All sticks together. Again, if you wanted to like crack an egg onto this, you could totally do that. It works out great. I'm just getting this really nice and fried. If you get this at Korean places, often they'll put kimchi in it, they'll put carrots in it, you put all sorts of stuff in here, and it all tastes really good. So I'm gonna take my just one of these little dishes and add a little bit of soy. Figure out what else I want to put in a dipping sauce. I might put a little bit of vinegar in, because I like that little bit of sourness with something like this that's pretty rich. So I think the sourness of vinegar acid kind of cuts through. Okay, so I'm going to use just a tiny bit of black vinegar. Black vinegar is really powerful stuff, so I'm going to go real light with it. If you use a white vinegar, you could use a little bit more. And then I'll just hit this with sesame oil too. That nice kind of roasty, toasty sesame character. And then I'm going to get just a little bit of Korean chili flake and stir that in. You could also put in like, grated garlic, or there's all sorts of stuff you could kind of add, make your dipping sauce extra tasty. Okay. That pancake is looking good. Now the question is, when I go to flip this, do I want to try to be really fancy and flip this by hand in one clean flip, which means it'll probably hit my microwave, or I'm going to screw up on camera. I can try to use this thing to leverage it over, or I can always shove it out on a plate and then easily invert it over the top. And that's usually what I end up doing with my pancakes when I'm trying to flip them, because that's sort of the more surefire method. I might take a dare and try flipping this one just for shits and gigs, just to see if I can really impress you guys. But I don't know, that might just fold my pancake in half. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and do the surefire method. So I got a plate. I'm gonna be careful not to burn myself here, but I'm gonna put that out on the plate, pour some of this oil on top, and then I'm just gonna flip it like that. Boom. So that's the safe way, the safer way. I got really nice and crispy mushrooms. The batter's starting to get good and cooked up. And I'll just let this go for a few more minutes, and then probably maybe even flip again, try to get it crispy, really crispy on both sides. And then I'll show you eating it. Should be pretty good. Here's my Korean chili flake. So I'm just add just a little bit of that to my dipping sauce. Okay, dipping sauce tastes good. Pancakes come along here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and check the chat real quick just to see if you guys had any feedback for me. So I'm gonna take it off the stand here so I can hold my phone. Slightly better view of the pan. Let's see, chat. Okay, there was 9 questions. Okay, do mushrooms need to be pressure canned? I don't know. You can pressure can mushrooms. If you put them in an acidic solution, you don't really have to worry about it. Do I use standard acidic mixture? I just use vinegar and I change the vinegar components whenever I do something different. How long does lobster mushroom butter last? I don't know, I kept it last year for about a year and then I used it all. So yeah, I don't know, a year. Flash flip, no, I'm gonna play it safe. Yeah, I'd love to come to your banquet next year. Sounds great. The fruit in the chutney was quince. It's quince and chanterelle. I assume these are Korean chives because I got them in a Korean market, but that would be my best guess. So there you go. I'm gonna put you guys back on the stand here so I can use both my hands to cook again. And again, if you like this style of live cooking and kind of hearing me off the cuff talk about stuff, definitely check out my Instagram because I do a lot of this on there. Okay, again, I could flip it in one go, but I'm going to play it safe and flip using the plate. So. Yep. Trying to get all sides of this thing nice and brown. Crispy and brown. So it should be really good. Looking forward to eating this. Showing you guys what it tastes like. So this is the kind of thing that's just, it's a quick dinner. I used to make this all the time. Unfortunately, I'm living alone right now. And I went through a breakup recently, so I don't have anyone to cook for, which sucks. I wish things were different, but this is what we got. So I'm cooking for one, and I'll just have to eat the leftovers at a later date. Yeah, that looks good. That's nice and brown. Probably good to go here. So I'm gonna flip this out. There we go. We're gonna move over to the counter or to the block again. Position you guys. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a knife and run through the pancake. Cut this thing up. And some smaller pieces, and sometimes in Korean places they'll kind of cut a lot of like random size pieces because it's easier to eat with chopsticks. But I'm just going to go for kind of nice pie-sized pieces. This is very hot, so I need to like wait a minute or two. It's definitely easier to do if I had a sharp knife and put it on the cutting board, but it's fine. It's all going to work out just fine. This is not fussy stuff, right? You don't need to measure anything. You don't really need to you can use pretty much any ingredients you have on hand. It's gonna taste good. It cooks quickly. It's easy to do. It's all mostly stuff that I have just sitting in my pantry. I can use literally any kind of mushroom you want. Oyster mushrooms work great for this kind of thing. Beach mushrooms, maitake, whatever you want. So I'm gonna do a quick dip in my soy vinegar, sesame, and chili mixture. So here's my green onion enoki pancake, kind of Korean style. Oh, great crunch. Yum, yum. That is a tasty, tasty dish. Came together real quick and easy. So yeah, there you have it. I'm going to I'm going to unplug, so now I can hear you guys again. So let me know if you have any questions. I am here. Are you guys still here?
Yes. Oh,
Perfect.
yeah. I think everyone online on Facebook has said they're starving right now. So you created a lot of hunger for all of us, even me, for sure. This is fantastic. What a quick, simple meal, but you incorporated some wild fungi, which is really wonderful. So, and you can definitely mean to get out there then as well, hey?
Yep.
I think there are some more questions up, but mostly I want to make sure that Sinclair's question doesn't get lost. He has one. Sinclair, would you like to ask?
Yeah, you have a winemaking background, and I know that there's a fermentation group in the Sonoma Club. Are there any particular wines that you would particularly recommend to go with your dishes or mushroom dishes in general?
I think in general, the wines that pair best with mushrooms are Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir and mushrooms have some of the same higher alcohols that have kind of a mushroomy, foresty flavor. So frequently, if I'm cooking a nice earthy mushroom dish, I will open a Pinot Noir. But for something like this, which is sort of more, the mushroom flavor isn't as strong of a component, I might just pair it with like a white wine, a Gruner, or a dry Gewürz or something like that, where the kind of acid would contrast the richness of the pancake.
Sorry. Someone online mentioned they would love to have a buttery Chardonnay with your dish today.
Yeah, that would work too. I'm not crazy about buttery Chardonnays because I live here in Napa and I've just had too many of them. But if that does it for you, then absolutely drink whatever you want.
Let's see. So my sister is starting to harass you. She says that it sounds like you're ready to flamingle or something like that. It sounds like you don't want to have your leftovers for the future, even though it looks delicious.
Yeah, I don't like leftovers. I prefer to feed people immediately than have anything left over. That's me.
That's a fair point. Someone's asking if your recipe is available on Instagram or one of your other social media channels.
I do a lot of live cooking on Instagram, but I don't write recipes down because I don't use recipes. So if you see me cook it, that's as close as you're going to get to me doing a recipe. I do occasionally, for my Patreon subscribers, write out recipes, but it's tricky because I don't ever measure anything. So I have to kind of like sit there and try to figure out what the ratios were. So again, I usually just say, just watch my cooking stream if you want to see a recipe.
No, fair enough. And there are a few people that are asking, what is your Instagram handle name?
It is Fascinated by Fungi.
Okay.
So
yeah. And is that the same for TikTok as well and everything else?
Yes,
or?
it is. It is the same across pretty much all platforms. If you go to my website, all the links are there on my website. Fascinatedbyfungi.com. I do a lot of educational stuff there. I've answered a lot of questions. I've tried to provide as many links as possible. I have mushroom discount tabs. I have cool t-shirts and merch and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, please check it out and follow me on, whatever social media platform is your preferred one.
For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, your videos are super hilarious. I mean, there's a lot of feedback about it. It's you slapping mushrooms around and getting some fun sounds out of them and cool colors.
I mean, again, the point of a lot of that stuff, because I get accused a lot of like hurting nature and destroying things, is I do things that generate an emotional response. Because if you get people to get emotional about something, that's when they go to the comments and they leave a comment, and then maybe they read the description, and then maybe they learn something. And so I've been able to reach a lot of people by just the fact that I'm able to engage audiences that don't normally look at mushroom content. So
yeah, no, that's really important. I really appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of other people do too, because you got to get the word out. They're everywhere, right? And everyone's curious. You got to segue into that somehow. To note, I have the same poster that was just behind you on my wall, just in front of me right now too. It's a good one.
It's a classic. Yep.
It's a classic.
I mean, mine's a dish towel, and I just put it on the wall because I thought it was cool. But
oh, that's fun. Yeah, no, mine's an actual poster. Anyways. But I mean, if there's lots of positive feedback on Facebook. Of course, everyone's loved it so far. So thank you very much for taking the time to teach us for this long and to cook for us as well. I think that's a first on Zoom for us.
Sure. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Any more questions before we call it? And everyone, last question. What is Tom's all-time favorite mushroom dish? Tom, is there a Tom out there?
I don't know.
What is your favorite mushroom dish, Gordon?
Probably my favorite that I've made that's like an all mushroom dish is a Spiraceus radicata carbonara. So there's a cookbook out there called The Mushroom Hunter's Kitchen by Chad Hyatt, and I've taken a lot of tips and tricks from him. But he has a recipe for Spiraceus carbonara where he uses Spiraceus as the noodle, and he makes a carbonara mix. And I've riffed on that a couple of times and added truffles and added other things. Because I'm not a carbonara purist. I think you can put anything you want in there. But versions of that with the Spiraceus noodle have been probably my favorite mushroom dish.
Oh, that sounds really delicious. Have you tried bacon in it then?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've done bacon.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of versions of it because I don't always have the exact things for carbonara, but you use interchangeable pieces and it's still good.
Oh, that sounds really good. I'm very hungry now too. Everyone says, thank you for your time. Honestly, everyone's really enjoyed it. It's been incredibly informative and fun at the same time. That's exactly what we needed for January 2022.
Cool.
Thank
you guys very much for having me. It was a pleasure to hang out with you.
Thank you, Gordon. Absolutely super. Very good indeed.
Thank you so much. I'll tune us out now. Goodbye, everybody. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Thank you.